It's an interesting question because it's really a question that goes back to the very early days of what became the European Union. And if you go back to the foundation of the common market, as we used to call it, European Economic Community, you find that there was considerable interest actually in North Africa in developing close ties to the European Union. So Morocco was given some sort of associate status. And so the sort of aspiration that the European Union, as it became, could become something even larger and could encompass the whole of, well, most of the Mediterranean, was something that was clearly in some people's minds. But at the same time, of course, it was recognized that it was unrealistic, that the gap between economic performance in North Africa remains to this day. The gap between that and Europe remains extremely wide. So one can understand that nothing really developed on that front. But then we can also take into the picture the very difficult relationships that developed between the former colonies in North Africa and to some extent the Middle East and the European Union, members of the European Union. So the difficulties that France and Algeria had in developing close ties after the trauma of the Algerian independence movement. So that again has rather conditioned these relationships. And it also allowed intruders like the Soviet Union to enlarge their presence within the Mediterranean, because it's always been one of Russia's great ambitions to be able to gain some sort of influence within the Mediterranean, use the Mediterranean also as a gateway into the world beyond. So I think what came out of that was a failure of the two sides to engage, and I understand why they found it very difficult to engage. And the residue of that still remains. For instance, the whole question of migration. This is really the major issue which the European Union finds itself discussing every day almost in relation to the southern shores of the Mediterranean. And that's something which clearly is going to be extremely difficult to resolve. But then beyond that, there's also the question of the economic ties which could be created between countries in the northern part of the Mediterranean and those in the southern part. And my sort of sense is that there's a very long way to go on that. And historic antagonisms, issues to do with alliances, NATO, all this sort of thing. It's led to a considerable amount of difference of opinion, of difficulties negotiating, and so on. And then if you want to go right into the Eastern Mediterranean, I don't want to say anything about this, but if you bring Turkey into the picture, it becomes even more complicated. If you bring Cyprus into the picture, which is, of course, a member of the European Union, it becomes even more complicated.